They say the West was built on grit, dust, and a man's word, but what happens when a woman shows up with more grit than half the men combined? The sun was high and cruel that July afternoon in Prescott, Arizona. Dry winds sliced through the canyons and kicked up dirt like it meant to bury something. Hannah Cooper stepped off the stagecoach with a trunk under her arm and nowhere to go. Not really. She was tall, too tall. Some whispered, strong in a way that made people stare, not admire. And she'd heard it all. Too big, too strange, too much. The street squinted back at her, full of men in rolled sleeves and sunburned necks who paused just long enough to judge. But Hannah didn't flinch. She'd come here chasing a promise, a job offer from the Henderson family housekeeping, stable pay, room to sleep. It was her last card. She held it close, except the house wasn't expecting her. Mrs. Henderson opened the door with a face pinched tighter than her corset strings and said, "We already hired someone else," like it was a fact of nature. She didn't even ask Hannah's name, but just one look out, one curl of the lip, and the door clicked shut. That was all it took. It always comes down to that, doesn't it? One glance, one judgment. She stood there, a full minute, maybe more, long enough for the heat to start pressing into her collar. Her trunk sat where she left it, same as her pride. She didn't reach for either. And that's the moment every man watching her expected her to break, but she didn't. Now, here's the thing. A man watching from the edge of the street took note not of her size, but of her stillness. How she didn't yell, didn't cry, just breathed. He didn't say much, just walked up and said, "Got a spare room, if you want it." But that's not this part of the story. That's coming next. For now, that's coming next. Hannah stood alone in the middle of a sunburned town that didn't want her. A woman out of place, out of options. But not out of fight. Some folks say the West made men tougher, but it also broke the ones who didn't bend. Hannah. She didn't bend. She planted her boots and waited for the wind to change. Because deep down, she knew she wasn't just looking for shelter. She was looking for a place that wouldn't try to shrink her. And sometimes, that kind of place shows up in the most unexpected shape, like a cabin on the ridge. The street hadn't changed, but something had shifted. Hannah was still standing there. Boots planted, sun roasting the back of her neck. Her trunk hadn't moved an inch, neither had the stairs. But then, a voice cut through the heat like cool water. "You looking for a place to stay?" It wasn't loud, wasn't forceful, just enough to break the silence. She turned. The man walking toward her wasn't trying to impress anyone. His boots were dusty. Shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, arms marked by sun and work, a hat pulled low, but not enough to hide the steady eyes beneath. "Name's Eli Walker," he said. "I got a place up north of town. Bit of a ride, but there's a roof, and I ain't using the spare room." She didn't answer right away. Why would she, a stranger, out of nowhere, offering shelter to a woman he didn't know? In a town where she'd just been turned away without a second thought. So she asked the only question that mattered. "Why?" He shrugged, like it wasn't anything. "Because I watched you get kicked like a stray dog, and you didn't so much as blink. That kind of quiet says more than talk ever will." That shut her up for a second. Eli pointed toward the hitch rail where 2 horses waited. "You ride? Enough." He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and headed for the saddle. Hannah followed. Not because she trusted him, and not yet. But because sometimes you don't wait for a better option. You ride toward what doesn't feel wrong. The trail north wound through dry brush and pine on pines, the air cooling as they climbed into higher ground. This ain't just about survival. This is more than a love story. It's a story about building home when nowhere else would take you. They didn't speak much. Just the sound of hooves on dirt and the occasional creak of leather. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet in a way Hannah hadn't felt in a long time. Eli's cabin came into view around a bend, a squat wood house tucked between trees, with a small barn, a lean-to, and what looked like a stubborn cow chewing grass like she'd been born unimpressed. Eli dismounted, tied the reins, then opened the cabin door and held it without speaking. Hannah paused. "You expecting anything in return?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Nope, Just don't steal the silver. Not that I got any. She cracked the faintest smile, stepped through the doorway. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and old pine. It was clean, simple. A table, a stove, 2 chairs that didn't match, and a quilt folded with more care than she expected. That night, they ate stew thick enough to hold a spoon upright. Eli didn't pepper her with questions, didn't treat her like a stray, just passed the bread, cleared the dishes, and let her wash if she wanted. Next morning, she was already splitting kindling when he came out of the barn. "You ever muck stalls?" "Not yet." "You will." And that was that. No promises, no lectures, just work. Over the next few days, something like a rhythm formed. She learned the fence line, the water pump, how to scrub tack until the leather stopped creaking. Eli let her move at her own pace, didn't hover, didn't judge. One evening, they sat on the porch, sipping weak coffee that somehow still tasted better than anything she'd had in weeks. The sun was settling low, casting long shadows across the ridge. "You always been out here alone?" she asked. "Since the war," he said. "Had a brother. Didn't make it home. Folks passed before that. Prescott felt too crowded, so I built something quieter." She nodded, didn't push, just let the words hang there. "I was supposed to be married once," she said. "He said I made him feel small." Eli looked sideways. Then he was small. She didn't say anything. But her hand didn't shake when she set down the mug. There was something about that porch, something about the way the trees moved in the wind, that made silence feel like comfort instead of emptiness. They didn't touch, didn't flirt. But when she stood to go inside, Eli stood too. And neither of them said good night like they meant goodbye. Hannah had settled into the rhythm of the place without really meaning to. Each morning, she woke before first light, pulled on her boots, and stepped into the cool air. The kind that clings to the hills before the heat rolls in, even in July. The kind that reminded you life out here wasn't meant to be easy. She fed the chickens, hauled water, learned how to check the fence without wasting steps. She didn't ask Eli for much, and he didn't hover. He showed her once, then let her figure it from there. It was a quiet kind of respect rare as rain in Arizona. By the end of the second week, she'd started humming while she worked, just low, absent-minded. She didn't even know she was doing it. Eli never said a word about it. But he lingered a little longer in the barn when she did. One afternoon, she found a stack of old ledgers on the table, handwriting cramped and numbers off by a hair. "You keep books?" she asked. "Try to. My brother was the one with a head for figures. I mostly squint and hope." She smiled and pointed to a tally. "You counted the same saddle twice." He stared, then grunted. "So that's why Dobin's boy was hollering last time." She didn't ask, just picked up a pencil and started sorting columns. Eli stoked the stove and said nothing more. That evening, after the chores, they sat out front with 2 chipped mugs of coffee and watched the light shift across the hills. The silence wasn't awkward. It was just there, like a second skin. "You ever think about where you'd be if you hadn't come this way?" he asked, voice low. "Sometimes," she said. "But I don't dwell on it. There wasn't anything worth staying for." He nodded, slow. "I figure you've had folks let you down." "I have," she said, "but none of them are here." There it was again, that space between words where trust starts to build, even if you don't name it. But peace doesn't last long out here, not when the land's too wide and secrets don't stay buried. The next day, Hannah rode into town alone, just needed a few supplies, coffee, salt, maybe a bolt of cloth if the price was right. The general store was quiet, but not empty. Folks still looked at her sideways, but this time, she didn't flinch. She had dirt on her boots and purpose in her step. Let 'em talk. She was reaching for a tin of tobacco when the deputy walked in. Young guy, sharp badge, too clean for the dust. He paused when he saw her. "You staying out at Walker's place?" She turned, slow. "I am." He scratched his jaw. "You know about him." "I know he hasn't asked me a single question I didn't want to answer." The deputy hesitated. "You ought to ask him about Tucson. Summer of '68. Big fire." Bigger accusations. "Man was on posters." She didn't say a word, just picked up her tin and paid. On the ride back, the sun hit different, hotter. like it was trying to boil something up from the inside. When she got to the cabin, Eli was chopping wood, shirt off, back streaked with sweat and sawdust, and he looked up, smiled faint. You get what you needed. Mostly, he noticed her tone, set the axe down slow. What's on your mind? Tucson, she said. One word, flat. His face didn't change much. Just a flicker in the eyes, like a horse that hears something in the brush but won't spook unless it has to. That was a long time ago. I figured. He walked over, grabbed a tin cup from the stoop, poured some water from the bucket, and sat on the steps. You want the truth? She nodded once. I was working freight. Just me and my brother, hauled goods between towns. We stopped in Tucson that week, got caught up in a fire no one expected. Someone claimed we torched a barn for insurance. It wasn't true. We were cleared eventually, but the posters stayed longer than the charges. She sat beside him. Let the words settle. You ever run? He shook his head. No. We stayed. Faced it. My brother, he didn't survive the heat stroke after. I kept the cabin because it was the last place that didn't ask me to explain myself twice. Silence fell again. Not the soft kind this time. This one had edges. I ain't a hero, Hannah. But I didn't light that fire. She studied him. Sun on his skin, dust in his hair, and something tired in his shoulders. Not the kind you get from chopping wood. The kind you carry when your name's been dragged through dirt you didn't make. She stood, brushed the dirt from her hands. I believe you. He looked up, real slow. You sure? Yeah. Because if you were guilty, you wouldn't have told me at all. And just like that, something shifted again. Not huge, not loud, but real. That night, she hung her coat on the peg like she meant to stay. Summer was stretching on, the days baking the ridge until you could swear the heat pulsed out of the ground. Hannah and Eli had settled into a quiet rhythm they both needed. She knew the barn creaks. He watched her hum at dusk. Life wasn't exciting, but for once, it felt steady. Until one afternoon, everything changed. Hannah was checking fence posts down by the creek. Heat shimmered on the rails. Crickets buzzed. She heard a footstep behind her, uneven, deliberate. She spun. 3 men, dusty and armed, stood just out of reach, shirts worn thin by the sun, hands brushing rifles. One step forward. You, Walker. She opened her mouth. Didn't know what to say. 11 days ago, she wouldn't have known to be afraid, but now, her pulse hit her ears. I am. Eli's voice came from behind. He wasn't hurried. Just calm. The lead man's eyes flicked to Eli, sizing him up. Heard you got some prime land here, the man said, and ain't planning on sharing. Eli took slow steps forward, hands still empty. We don't share land. He spoke low and even. The man smirked, but his finger twitched near the trigger. Hannah felt the sweat under her collar. Best be smart about this, he added. That was it. He turned and slid back into the shadows, his buddies following. Not a shot fired, not a word more. After they were gone, Hannah ran to Eli. You all right? She asked, voice caught tight. He nodded, looking out where they'd stood. They'll be back. That night, the wind felt colder. Not because the air shifted, but because the threat became real. They didn't sit and talk it out. They moved. Locked the barn. Stashed extra tack. Double-checked the gates. Lighted no fires near the creek. Hannah felt her heart hammer in a way that had nothing to do with hard work. This was bigger than chores. This was about survival. In the morning, she found Eli repairing the gate. Wood splintered by stones. He didn't look her when she came out. You planning on fighting these men? She asked. He paused. Hammer halfway to nail. I'm planning on not losing this land, he said, and I'm damn glad you're here. That was the moment she realized this place belonged to both of them now. She stepped forward and pulled the hammer from his hand. Then let's fix this together. They worked in silence, side by side, nail by nail. They rebuilt the gate. But it wasn't just the wood that felt stronger. It was them together. Later that afternoon, Eli saddled one of the horses. I'm heading out, he said. Need to know who we're dealing with. She didn't argue. She tied her jacket, swung onto the back of another horse. They rode out toward the next ridge, where the dust had settled in the distance. Not men on horses, just smoke curling near the tree line. Hard to say if it was hearth or trouble. Eli slowed the horse. "Stay here," he said. She nodded, holding the reins tight. Minutes passed. He returned. His face had that look like he'd seen more than just smoke. "They got a camp," he said. 3 men, rifles, mules, no sign of trading gear. They rode back to the cabin without speaking. She felt each step of the mare under her, felt the burden in his shoulders, and felt her own that night. They argued. "Quiet at first. We can't wait," Hannah said. "We need to act." Eli shook his head. "It's their land unless we prove it," he said. "We're going to rustle trouble if we do anything foolish. They threaten us. They burned my sleep." She said, "I'm not waiting." He closed his eyes, massaging his forehead. "There's a difference between holding your ground and jumping into a feud." She didn't answer, but the firelight danced on her face. They sat there till the fire burned low. Neither moved to refill the mugs. In the morning, they walked out together past the gate, past the cow, past the barn. The air smelled of pine and fear. Eli paused at the edge of the field. "How do you feel?" She looked at the motel of Tress. "Ready." They nodded. Unspoken promise to stand or fall together. The sun hadn't even cleared the trees when the trouble returned. 3 riders, same ones from the creek. They didn't sneak in this time. They came bold dust, trailing behind them like they owned the whole damn land. Eli saw them first. He was already at the fence, hammer in hand. Hannah was inside, boiling coffee, when she heard the hooves. By the time she stepped outside, Eli was standing by the barn, his back straight. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked, voice low. He didn't take his eyes off them, just said, "Wasn't much choice left yesterday. The lead man reined in first, same sneer, same twitchy fingers. Didn't expect you to be so stubborn," he said. Eli didn't move, didn't expect you to be so loud. Behind them, Hannah had her hand on the shotgun hanging just inside the cabin door. She didn't lift it, not yet, but her stance said she could. "We gave you a warning," the man said, "and we heard it." Eli said, "We just didn't care. That was it." The man leaned forward in his saddle, like he was deciding how many steps it would take to turn this quiet field into something bloody. His buddies spread out just enough to worry Hannah, but then a sound cut through the moment. Hoofbeats fast and fast and coming from the ridge. Another rider. One man, older, coat flapping in the breeze, hat low, horse lean. Eli blinked. "It's Traeger." The 3 strangers turned. The man slowed just enough before pulling up beside them. His voice was rough, weathered. "Morning, boys. You're trespassing." The one with the sneer narrowed his eyes. "This ain't your business." Traeger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See, that's where you're wrong. I rode this land long before you ever dreamed of stepping on it, and I don't take kindly to men threatening folks who've done nothing but mind their own." The man scoffed. "You gonna stop us?" Traeger leaned slightly forward. "No. But I brought the sheriff." That's when the second wave came. 2 more riders, one with a badge shining in the sun, the other armed and scanning the scene like he already knew how this would end. The mood shifted. Quick. The lead man's sneer dropped. He kicked his horse around, muttering something under his breath. They didn't argue. Didn't draw. They just rode off fast enough to raise dust, but slow enough to pretend it wasn't fear. The sheriff nodded toward Eli and Hannah. "Heard there was tension. Figured I'd let it simmer a bit before showing up." "Guess that was long enough." Eli nodded. "You got good timing." Traeger tipped his hat. "I don't like bullies. Never did." And just like that, they left. Quiet returned like it had never been broken. Back at the cabin, Hannah sat on the porch, still holding the shotgun in her lap. "Do you think that's the end of it?" she asked. Eli poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed her one. "Don't know. But it's the first time I didn't feel alone in the fight." She looked out at the horizon. Still quiet, still wide. "You were ready to stand," she said. "Even if it was just us." He sat beside her. "I've lost enough already. This is worth standing for." They drank their coffee in silence. No cheers. No celebration. Just the kind of peace that comes after you look danger in the eye and don't blink. That night, the stars were sharp and the air cooler. Eli didn't say much before bed, neither did Hannah, but before turning in, She placed the shotgun back in its rack and hung a single horseshoe above the door. Eli noticed, didn't say a word, just smiled soft, the kind that says, "This ain't over, but we're still here." Even when the danger fades, the scars don't always heal easy. After that morning, life on the ridge settled into a quiet normal. The barn was locked at night, the horses penned, and the shotgun leaned by the door, ready but unseen. The fields glowed gold in the late summer sun, and for the first time, Hannah felt safe. Only some battles don't show on the surface. One evening, they shared a dinner of roasted squash and beans from the garden Hannah tended. She hummed softly, thinking of nothing, just how clean the air smelled this time of day. Eli caught her humming and paused, something soft behind his eyes. "It suits you," he said. "Simple as that." She nodded, looking down at her plate, not because it was uncomfortable, but because she wasn't sure why it mattered. She'd practiced this life sweaty chore, steady work, quiet nights, but there were things in her she hadn't dealt with, feelings that rustled like ghosts in the cupboard. Later that night, Hannah lay awake, the quilt heavy on her chest. She thought of Prescott, of the sneers, of the slamming door, of being measured and found wanting before a word was said. She thought of Eli, standing in the dawn, quiet and steady. She thought of that shotgun, the promise of strength, still rattling in her mind. She slipped out of bed, walked to the barn in bare feet. The night cool under her toes, she ran her hand along the wooden stall, felt the rough grain. "Nothing afraid here." Not with a barrel between your hands, but words were harder. Eli followed, watching her from the threshold. He didn't start a conversation and just leaned against the door jamb. They stayed that way for minutes, neither spoke. Finally he sighed. "You don't have to stay because you worry about folks saying it was your fault." She pulled her coat tighter. "It's not that." He stepped forward. "Then what is it?" She swallowed hard. "Eyes on the ground, I can face a man pointing a gun. But I can't face forgetting I ever felt small. And some nights, I'm scared I'll stop being strong." He nodded, slowly. "I don't think you'll stop, but I get it." She looked up into the kind of eyes that don't judge. "Sometimes I don't feel brave. I just act that way." He reached out, brushed her hair. "That's all bravery is, Hannah, acting even when it feels like there's nothing left." She closed her eyes, let his hand settle against her cheek. The barn smelled like hay and summer nights. "You're not alone," he whispered. She rested her forehead against his chest, felt the steady rise and fall, his heartbeat slow and real. They stood together, no gun, no fence, no words that need armor, just that. Morning came, and with it, a new kind of promise. Fall came quiet that year, not with fanfare, not with storms, but with small things, yellow leaves drifting past the windows, a chill that crept in slow during the mornings, a sense in the way Eli started measuring more carefully before cutting wood. He didn't say much, but Hannah noticed. They'd survived something more than just trouble on horseback. They'd crossed that invisible line between living next to someone and building something with someone. One afternoon, Eli stood by the fence, looking out at the far edge of the field. "You ever wonder," he asked, "what did it feel like to really belong somewhere?" Hannah didn't answer right away. She just stepped beside him, hands tucked in her coat. "I think it feels a lot like this," she said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper land office documents, half filled with her name already written in. "I want your name on this place," he said. "Not just because you've earned it, but because you've changed it." She looked down at the page, then up at him. "All right," she said, "but I get to pick the porch chairs." They both laughed, and somehow, in that breeze rolling in from the hills, it felt like they'd said more than 100 promises. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that felt permanent. Hannah dried herbs for the winter. Eli built a writing desk for her, carved her initials into the back where only she would ever see it. They rode into town together to file the land, then stopped by the general store for pie and nails. On the way back, the sun low and soft, Eli said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I was thinking maybe next spring we could have a small ceremony, nothing big, just us, a few neighbors. Maybe Traeger if he ain't wandered off again." Hannah blinked. "You mean?" I don't want to just build with you," he said. "I want to call you mine, proper, if you'll have me." She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just smiled, like she'd been waiting on the words to catch up with the truth she already knew. "Of course I will," she said. So they marked a spot near the ridge flat, with enough view to see both sunset and sunrise. They didn't rush plans, didn't draw blueprints, but they did start laying stones for a foundation. Not just for a house, but for a life. That winter was the first that didn't feel lonely for either of them. They still had work. Fences to mend, logs to split. But the silence inside the cabin, it felt full. Like breathing beside someone who understood the weight you carried and never asked you to set it down. One night, as snow fell soft outside, Hannah pulled a worn notebook from the drawer. She'd started writing again, just a few lines each evening. Memories, thoughts, questions she hadn't answered yet. She wrote something simple on the first page. You don't need to be fearless to build a life, just brave enough to try. And maybe that's the heart of it. Maybe all any of us are looking for is a place where we don't have to be perfect. Just present. A place where we're not judged by what we've run from, but by what we choose to build next. Hey, if this story stayed with you, if it made you think of someone such or reminded you of something you've carried too long, I hope you'll leave a comment, share your thoughts. Do you believe a place can heal you? Do you think it's ever too late to start again? And what would you build if fear wasn't in the way? If this story brought you even a little peace or hope, tap that like button. And if you'd like more quiet stories that speak loud to the heart, hit subscribe and join us on this journey. Because somewhere out there, just past the ridge, someone is still trying to build something better. And maybe they just need to know they're not the only one.